Shabbat Shalom. And Shabbat Shalom to those who are joining us by streaming. A couple of years ago, I got an email resignation from someone here, and they weren't a real member. They just joined for 1 year so they could send me a nasty email and get a bat mitzvah out of it. But they sent me an email, and they said, I'm leaving the congregation on principle, which of course it wasn't, and it is because liberal rabbis like you, but you're the worst. You bring in current events into your Divrei Torah. And current events do not belong in Divrei Torah, so I'm going to go back to this other congregation where they never do that. So today I'm going to have a Divrei Torah where I talk about current events. In today's parashah Vayigash, we have the famous sort of moral question, also raised by the rabbis, one of the great debates of the parashah, which is, when Yosef centralizes agriculture and centralizes the whole system of the economy in Egypt, was this a good thing or a bad thing? Because on the one hand, it saved thousands, tens of thousands, maybe more lives. On the other hand, it forced people to become serfs on their own land by selling it back to Pharaoh. So today I have sort of a story of two cities, one in which it is good and one in which it may not be so great. So let's start using current events on the side of the debate that says this is a very, very dangerous thing. And although Yosef saved people initially, it really can produce a terrible kind of inequality and injustice against farmers themselves. I wonder if there is injustice and inequality against farmers in our own country today. So the media today, and I know we say media, but I would say common knowledge, conventional wisdom, is that the troubles of today's farmers stem from, let's say, Trump's trade war with China, or just in general taking any political leader out of it, having to do with the cost of crops based on how they rise and fall, depending on trade and trade with other countries, and tariffs play a part of it, and that the crisis has been building for decades to this point. But is that really why farmers are in debt and suffering and mortgaging their equipment and their farms today? And the answer is apparently no. What has really been producing this injustice is a handful of corporations controlling the agricultural markets. So let's talk about this for a second. Today, farmers are facing significant losses. So I am seeing current events just on our page in front of us. The farmers, they're desperate, the famine is coming, the centralization is happening, and they're forced to sell to Pharaoh. Farmers face an average loss of $150 to $350 today per acre for the crops of cotton, soy, corn, and rice. And farm debt is expected to reach a record high of $560 billion this year. The aid that was recently pledged to farmers was $12 billion out of $560 billion of debt. So where did this, if it's not because of the price of crops internationally in the commodity markets, what's producing it? So the cost of seed, fertilizer, and the machinery itself has risen much faster than crop prices. What's it due to? It's due to the centralization by corporations of the process. What a few years ago were thousands of seed companies have now merged into 3. 46 fertilizer firms are now 4. This allows these companies to inflate prices, leaving farmers with little option but to pay, which is pretty much the Yosef story. They have no option but to pay what Yosef asks on behalf of the Pharaoh. So great are the monopolies that I already gave a sermon on John Deere about 1.5 years ago, who made it a condition of buying their equipment, because the consolidation of equipment manufacturers, they made it a condition of buying the equipment. The farmers themselves were not legally allowed to repair them, but must go through their own service. Yes, you own a tractor, mortgage yourself to buy one, but you're not allowed to touch the engine or even possess a manual that has diagrams. Right? Some states, beginning with Colorado and others, the sermon I gave was on the right to repair. I compared it to the Mishkan, in which every part is replaceable. There's also, so there's a monopoly on what farmers are forced to pay for their equipment and for their seed and for their fertilizer. And those prices have wildly outstripped the commodity prices. Not only that, but there are monopolies on how they sell. Like in the Yosef story, many communities only have one buyer. Grain purchasing companies have consolidated into Cargill, Bunge, and Archer Daniels Midland, who together control almost 80% of the market. In many agricultural communities, they only have one available to sell their grain to. But even if they have two, basically those companies basically can choose what prices they sell. So let's say I'm a farmer and I grow corn or I grow cotton. I really don't have an option of whom to sell it to, because there may actually be only one buyer I can ship to, or two, who basically have the same price. And so I have to sell it at the price that they dictate. They have to accept the prices offered by these companies, which are often below their own costs. The crisis has led to the loss of over 300,000 farms since 1997, which dreadfully impact their actual local communities. Government aid creates and enforces the system. So this is a part that I wasn't quite aware of. Federal aid packages flow, the government calls this flowing, they flow through the farmers. So farmers actually don't receive any of the aid that the government announces is going to farmers. They actually go directly to the companies the farmers owe money to. So they go directly to the fertilizer company, the seed company, and John Deere, the machinery company. And if they owe money to those buyers of the grain, the money goes directly to the buyer. So think about this. The companies that have monopolized the selling of what the farmers need, they never experience a loss regardless of the commodity prices, because they set the prices they want. And the farmer may go bankrupt trying to pay it back, and if the government pays back, the money goes directly to the corporations who have locked in their profit. So the corporations can decide what profit they're making regardless of how the economy is doing. And in addition, it goes for the same for the seed company. In fact, in many communities, the seed companies, the buying companies who purchase the grain, they set their prices very, very carefully in order to impoverish the farmer, but in order to make a maximal profit during the reimbursement process from federal aid. Essentially, the system allows the corporations to profit from the aid money without having to lower their prices or take a cut in their profit margins. Essentially, they're just laundering tax money. Farmers suggest that a different kind of solution would be to establish price floors for crops. In other words, something I thought was sort of already happening. I thought when we announced Farm Aid, what we mean is that the farmer who says, well, I'm selling my crop at $350 loss per acre, I thought the government would say, we'll make up that $350, so at least you can break even. But that's actually not what happens. The money only goes to the corporations. And some of the debt is reduced to the farmer, but as I said before, they set the prices so that the debt is not wiped out. The debt is perpetuated. Therefore, the negative consequence of this side of the debate, which is by centralizing, by monopolizing, ultimately farmers become serfs of their own land, even when the corporations are having record profits. And if there's a problem, the taxpayers bail out, not the farmers, but the corporations. Okay, I start off with the bad news. That was the bad side of the debate. Is there any positive side of the debate that actually what Yosef did is a model of positive behavior that we can learn from? Well, yes, a week ago, I was reading New York Times, and I saw this article that maybe you did too. So this is literally December 19th. Tehran, a city of 10 million people, is basically without water. The Torah says there'll be 6 years of bounty and then 6 years of where the crops will not grow. They've experienced 6 years of drought. And then the driest autumn in over 50 years, which is like the Jubilee. So they've had the sabbatical year brought no relief. They had 6 years of lack, and then 50 years of reduced rainfall in the general fall. And the reservoirs supplying the city of Tehran have fallen to around 10% of capacity and often lower. They were talking about cutting off water to the city and evacuating large parts of Tehran not 2 weeks ago until they got a little bit of rainfall, but it's a temporary fix. Iran's president announced in November that if rain, this is just 2 months ago, a little bit over a month ago, that if rains did not come, parts of the city would be evacuated. And so, although the immediate pressure has been relieved by a very small rainfall, the future appears grim. This is not the only city that has talked about failing. Because you're talking about, could the great cities of Egypt fail? Was that really possible in this story? Well, the answer is yes. Cape Town in 2017 almost really was shutting off their water. They talked about whether they have a future. Sao Paulo, Brazil in 2015. Chennai, India in 2019. They have very efforts to mitigate the problem, but they are unsustainable efforts. In a rapidly warming world, the article says, it is only a matter of time before luck runs out in Tehran or in dozens of other drought-prone cities. And when it does, the lesson from the past is not that cities must simply find more water, but they must also control the limits. They must relate to the environment in a way that is sustainable. So, what is a city to do? The drought conditions we know are part of a result of climate change, and this problem will only increase. Although it is somewhat different. I used to live in Indonesia for 2.5 years. In Indonesia, they are talking about relocating the entire capital of Jakarta, which is I know it's over 10 million people at this point, because it's sinking, because of the water level rising. In fact, they started building an entirely new capital in Borneo, but we'll see but no one seems to want to move to it. So much of the Middle East, including Iran, is warming twice as fast as the global average, and climate change is altering precipitation cycles across the Iranian plateau. Winters are becoming shorter and drier. Snowpack in the Zagros and Alborz mountains, which are the ones that feed the reservoirs and aquifers, they're shrinking. And when rain does fall, it increasingly comes in intense bursts that run off hardened ground rather than soak in. In the paragraph that follows the Via Hafta, when it had the climate change paragraph where it talks about we need to get our rain in the proper season, it has 2 words in biblical Hebrew for rain. The first one is the soft rain, because the soft rain is needed to moisten the ground. So then the second word for rain is the hard rain, so the hard rain can be absorbed by the ground that is already softened. So it says that we have to get the soft rain in its right time, and we have to get the strong rain in the right time. And right now, those are not there, because if you just have hard rain without soft rain, it doesn't fill anything. In addition, people around the world, including in Iran and Tehran, just dig wells. I remember when I was in San Diego, I didn't understand how all these golf courses could be operating when the water bills for a resident were off the roof. You guys wouldn't believe it. And then I found out that the golf courses and farmers could just dig their own wells and drain aquifers without consequences. So what is the solution to no one seems to have the will to reduce consumption, to prevent the drilling of wells, to tell corporations and others that they cannot do that digging, and to change an entire city? Well, maybe the answer is Yosef. Maybe the answer is that we actually, in order to combat the effects of climate change and true possibilities of mass famine and failure, we need someone with the insight to understand climate change, to understand people, and to understand organization, to actually create a massive collective effort, to know that with the good years we have and the bad years we don't, we're going to need a massive change of behavior and execution. So on that side, we have Yosef saying, be in touch with nature, be in touch with God, have the courage for mass collective action, and you will survive. Shabbat Shalom.